I'm so excited to be here tonight. Once again, every single person that I worked with to help set this up is amazing. What a beautiful facility, beautiful place. So my plan is to just talk for as long as possible. I don't know if you guys have a time you want to get home by. All right, I guess we're in it together, guys. I got nowhere to be. Okay, so this is a picture of my daughter Eden, who just turned 2. I always give her a shout out in my presentations. So she just turned 2. It's a very old picture of her. And it's a very old picture of me as well. She's a doll. That was when she first sat up. First picture of her sitting up. Awesome. So the research study on the GrowNow model of executive functioning took place at the Stratford Friends School, which is a special needs school right outside of Philadelphia in Newtown Square. So we did a year-long research study on this specific model of executive functioning to great results and great progress. And I'd like to give a shout out to my sources in the beginning of the presentation. Give a shout out to some of the great leaders of the field of ADHD and executive functions, and some of the Mount Rushmore, as I refer to them as. The first is Sarah Ward. You know Sarah Ward? Nice. Fellow speech and language pathologist. Her work is really second to none in terms of treatment for ADHD and EF. A lot of her work has really become the gold standard. If you ever have a chance to take a Sarah Ward training, virtual, in-person, jump on it immediately. She does an amazing job, and we'll talk a little bit about her tonight. And then when it comes to the best of the best, the worldwide leader on ADHD is Dr. Russell Barkley. He's published numerous research studies, tons of books. He has his book, 12 Principles for Raising a Child with ADHD. So if you're a parent of a child with ADHD, read his books, learn more about him. He has a lot of free lectures on YouTube. He always does tons of podcasts. So type his name into the podcast app. There is no one better than Dr. Russell Barkley. He's the best of the best. A good friend of mine, Ryan Wexelblad, he's known as the ADHD Dude. You can find him online, on all social medias. Him and I have a parenting ADHD podcast coming out soon. He has incredible content on YouTube and Instagram. Like he has these videos called Dude Talk videos for young boys with ADHD. Lots of great parent training. He has a parent membership site that's really, really helpful. So his content is just incredible. And then my goal for this presentation, every time I do this presentation, I always tailor it to the specific audience, of course, all you wonderful people. But my goal for it is always to talk about the most up-to-date research. Because ADHD is quite possibly the most misunderstood neurodevelopmental disorder there is. And it's this group right here, the Harvard Center of the Developing Child, that's really at the forefront of this research. So check out their website, check out their great PDFs and all the great information they have. They're the ones that are on the forefront doing incredible work. And next is CHAD. So when your child gets diagnosed with ADHD, if you get diagnosed with ADHD, the very first thing that psych, that doctor, that pediatrician should be doing is giving you information about your local CHAD organization. So CHAD stands for Children and Adults with ADHD. They do parent support groups, they do kid support groups, tons of great information sessions, free resources. It's a national organization, so like based on the county or the area. So there's Suffolk County CHAD, Nassau County CHAD, all these different areas. So definitely find your local organization and take advantage of some of the free resources and some of the free events. So these are some of the names that we'll hear about today, and we'll get right into it. Cool. Okay, so we have to start by talking about the brain, the ADHD brain. We now know that the ADHD brain is truly a neurodiverse brain, a neurodiverse population. So this is a true neurodevelopmental disorder. Okay, so these brain imaging studies have confirmed ADHD truly is a disorder of the brain. And we're talking about all 3 areas: structure, function, and development. All 3 are affected, and all 3 are delayed in the true ADHD brain. We had the question before about ADHD. Is it really ADHD? Is it getting overdiagnosed? Individuals truly with ADHD who need the medication, who need the resources, we're talking about a neurodiverse brain in structure, function, and development, in overall delayed brain maturation. So the brain looks different, it's different in structure, it functions differently, lower levels of dopamine, different parts of the brain that don't, react at certain points, and it develops much slower, typically a 3 to 5 year delay in development. So the brain overall develops from back to front, and that front part of the brain is the last part to develop, typically in the neurotypical brain, not fully developed until around 25, 26, or 30 years old. And that prefrontal cortex right here behind the forehead is the home of executive functions. So we develop executive functioning all throughout childhood and adolescence and early young adulthood through varied experiences and interpersonal relationships, which we'll talk about. But with ADHD, we're going to have that delay. Okay?
Sorry, which scan is this that would show that the brain looks different?
What scan?
Yeah, how, like...
The MRI.
An MRI.
Yep.
Is that what people do to check if they need to die?
This is not, this was a long study with many, many people. Like for anybody to go and request an MRI to see if they have an ADHD brain, that science is not out there yet, and insurance is never going to cover that, of course. Yeah. So the prefrontal cortex in the ADHD brain, we have 3 to 10% reduced regional volumes in 5 different regions. So we're talking about the structure and the function here. Okay, so 5 different regions have reduced volumes. And now we're starting to dig a little bit deeper here from what all these great brain scan studies showed us. Okay, so the same parts of the brain impacted by ADHD are the same parts that deal with emotions, self-regulation, and self-awareness. So if you were to look in the most recent version of the DSM, the Diagnostic Standards Manual, and you look up ADHD, are you going to see anything about emotions there? Does anyone know? Where are my pros at? Professionals. No, you are not going to see anything about emotions there. It's going to be all about hyperactivity, inattentiveness, and external behaviors. Now we're learning that these parts of the brain, there's a huge emotional aspect. The limbic system, the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, is much smaller in the ADHD brain. The amygdala, where we figure out our emotions, we manage our emotions, we manifest our emotions. The anterior cingulate, where we make our social and emotional decisions, is much less activation in the ADHD brain. Now we're starting to move away from this hyperactivity, inattentiveness, classroom academic-based disorder, and now we're starting to figure out, okay, someone with ADHD, they're going to be affected socially as well, aren't they? There's going to be a social aspect to ADHD. Okay? Much less activation within that frontal lobe overall because it's developing so slowly. Okay? So this prefrontal cortex, all the great studies that we have done so far on what this organ is, this prefrontal cortex, it is so unbelievably necessary for social relationships. Our ability to initiate, maintain, and have positive social relationships is due to this prefrontal cortex. So this is a social organ. The prefrontal cortex is basically a giant Excel spreadsheet in the brain where you list all of your friends, all your acquaintances, all your colleagues, how you feel about them, what you owe them, what they owe you. It's a great way to just keep track of your overall social network. And that's what we do in our prefrontal cortex. But it's what this prefrontal cortex does that allows us to use our overall executive functioning skills. So it's in this part of the brain where humans are the only species on this planet that can sustain a behavior over time in the absence of a direct consequence. So if that consequence is not right there, staring you down, a positive consequence you want to attain or a negative consequence you want to avoid, if it's not right there in the immediate future, staring you down, that's the direct consequence. We, as humans, with the help of the prefrontal cortex, we have the ability to pause and stop and aim our behavior towards the future. So it's in this pause where that old phrase, stop and think, right? In this pause, it's nice to say pause the way a New Yorker says it again and not people point it out to me. So in this pause, we can stop and think and aim our behavior towards the future. Okay? So this is what allows us to sustain a behavior over time in the absence of a direct consequence. We can apply to colleges months before it becomes a reality. We can start working on our essay, doing internships, doing the SATs, the ACTs. We can work towards getting that driver's license. We can, work towards getting that bachelor's degree 4 years later, working towards it for 4 separate years. This is the power of the prefrontal cortex and executive functions. Our ability to work towards a goal that is in the distant future. Work towards a consequence that is in the distant future. Because humans, with the help of the prefrontal cortex, can create and sustain motivation even with a delay. And that right there is executive functioning at its finest. And that's what the human brain allows us to do and separates us from all other living species. We work towards something with a delay. Does that all make sense? Sweet. Now we can dive a little bit deeper into what this ADHD brain and what the research is telling us. Because a lot of us might go on Instagram, we might go on TikTok, we might go on social media, and we see nothing but videos telling us about how ADHD is this gift. And ADHD is so helpful, and it's made me so unique, and so all these great positives from it. But what does the research actually tell us? What do we know about this overall? So these brain differences in structure, function, and development, ADHD comes with an increased risk of substance abuse. See a lot of that in my practice. Driving accidents. Dr. Russell Barkley's twin brother with ADHD passed away in a driving accident. Risky behaviors, violence, job loss, early death, lower lifespan. Okay, so ADHD is something that needs to be taken seriously. The more that we talk about it's this gift, it's this amazing thing, individuals with ADHD can have other amazing talents. They can be unbelievably good, hyper-focused towards, your math, your science, whatever it may be, coding, music, the arts, the trades, whatever it may be, and that's something that we can push for them to be able to live an independent life. But we also have to look at some of the negative research that's hard to hear sometimes, so we can know just how serious ADHD is. And there's this quote by Dr. Russell Barkley: those with ADHD who have become successful, like your Michael Phelps, your Justin Timberlake, your Howie Mandel, those kind of guys, right? Those who have become successful did so in spite of their ADHD. Nobody with this disorder would choose to keep it. So what those individuals did, like Michael Phelps, for example, he was the most decorated Olympian of all time, right? All those gold medals, a fantastic job. But you learn more about his childhood, and his mom recognized early just how at risk he was due to his behaviors. So she had him scheduled in 15-minute increments as soon as he came home from school. And he was spending hours upon hours upon hours in the school, in the pool. And she hired a world-renowned swimming coach to work with him. And when that swim coach moved to a new state, she packed up the whole family and followed him to where he lived now. So she really kept on top of him. And now we see, ever since the Olympics are over, he retired from swimming, he's gotten into a little bit of trouble, hasn't he? He's been in the news for doing some getting caught with the law and things like that. So these are the things that truly are associated with this. Also you learn more about Michael Phelps as an individual. He had a family member in the NFL. His sister was a world star athlete. It was part of what he had in his DNA and his genes. ADHD was something that really held him back, but the parent coaching and his mom really helped him with that. Okay? There's this great study here. So studies have shown that having a child with ADHD is just as distressing to the parent as having a child with autism spectrum disorder. So this was a qualitative study done in 2019 talking about how difficult it is parenting a child with ADHD. Where are parents with ADHD kids here? guys, anyone agree with this? Yeah, so basically, you're never out of the woods. You know, you have your own executive functioning. You know, everyone has their own executive functions where at the end of the day they're exhausted and they can't take it anymore. But basically, when you have a kid with ADHD, you have to act as their executive functioning too, right? You're the executive functioning for the whole family. Constant check-ins, constant helping them to regulate, on top of the school, on top of relationships, on top of everything, you know, morning routines, evening routines, sleep, eating, all that, right? So it's incredibly distressing to the parents. So it's very, very important that this is a disorder that's taken seriously, and it's not something put on the internet just for likes and shares. It's very important that we spread true information about what ADHD truly is, so these kids can get the appropriate help and the appropriate evaluations like we talked about. Any questions so far? Okay. So, I'm talking a lot about ADHD and executive functions pretty much hand in hand, so let's dive a little bit deeper into the connection between ADHD and EF, executive functioning. So these executive skills are the skills that all children need to negotiate the demands of childhood and adolescence. So these are crucial life skills that kids need to get through childhood, adolescence, and beyond. Crucial life skills. And they become more and more critical as children venture into the world with decreasing parental supervision and guidance. And this is a big theme about what we're going to talk about today. So as kids get older and they're expected to become more independent, this is when executive function skills are needed. So fading parental support, independent skills, that's executive functioning. That's when these skills become crucial. And these skills typically develop gradually during the first 2 decades of life, peaking between 25 and 30 when that prefrontal cortex is fully developed. Okay? So here's a really important thing to think about and a great way to image and think about ADHD. So here we have the brain. The back of the brain is where we know, where we store information. We have our IQ. We know what to do. We know all the information. And then the front of the brain is where we perform, where we show what we know, where we perform in the natural environment. We use the social rules. We use the information we learn in the classroom. We've learned from past experiences, right? How many times do we hear about that individual with ADHD or executive functioning challenges that is 2E, twice exceptional, right? Above average to incredible IQ, honors and AP classes, right? But the ADHD brain truly splits the brain in half. So it completely splits the brain in half between knowledge and performance. You can have that high IQ, you can know the information, you can know what to do, but with ADHD, it does not allow you to show what you know and use what you know and perform in the natural environment. So the way we have to start to reframe ADHD is that it is not a disorder of attention. We're going to dive even deeper into that. It is a disorder of performance. It is a performance disorder where you are having difficulty showing what you know and performing in the natural environment, whether that be the classroom, home, recess. Recess is really hard for kids with ADHD, right? So it's performing and showing what you know in the natural environment. So a big theme of what we're going to talk about tonight is reframing ADHD and really understanding what it truly is. So we have to get rid of our old misconceptions about attention deficit, attention, hyperactivity, inattentiveness, and let's reframe it towards what the research is now showing us. Any questions there? Cool. Okay, so executive skills. We can go pretty quickly through this. What do lagging skills look like? So as you guys look through this list of, what lagging skills and executive functioning might look like, a pretty vague, simple list, how many of these resonate with you guys? How many of you guys see this and think, hey, that's my kid, or I teach a kid in my class that does that, right? Any of them specifically? You want to call one out? All of them? Nice. A lot of papers. So papers in the backpack in the garbage.
Is that a telltale?
The papers? Which one? The top one?
Yeah.
It can be, but it goes a lot deeper than that. So it's that's a big part of it. We'll talk about that. Obviously, does homework but doesn't turn it in. That's a big one, right? That causes a lot of fights in the family, right? Every day looks the same for them. Go to school, go home, stay home. They want to stay in that comfort zone and never want to leave it. Parents push them to go do different things, and it's a huge fight because it takes them away from what they want to do. And difficulty starting and completing tasks that don't offer instant gratification. And there's nothing more instant gratification in today's world than screens. Stimulus response screens, right? So this is a great way to figure out, okay, what are some of the things, right? Cool. So now we can dive a little bit deeper into the past and the present. So this is very important. So in the past, executive functions in ADHD were looked at as this external behavioral-based disorder. Okay? And many of these kids were sent to ABA and applied behavioral therapy and behavioral-based therapy. And it was heavy focus on hyperactivity. This kid can't sit still. Heavy focus on inattentive. That kid's a daydreamer. Attention deficit. It was all focused on external behaviors, which then led to an intensive focus on external organization and time management. Okay? Which then led to, and it was seen as a purely academic-based disorder. ADHD affects kids at school. And this heavy focus on external organization and time management led to things like this. Does anything here look familiar? You guys have seen that red countdown clock, right? Matthew's reward chart. Let's make a reward chart for Matthew. There's an FDA-approved game that'll cure your ADHD. That's real, by the way. There's a watch you can wear that can... It does not work. It does not work at all. It does not work at all. It's very expensive. And it's actually a video game that kids don't like playing. So if you make a video game kids don't like, you're batting 1,000. So we got our morning chart. We got the kid using Alexa to set up reminders. And it was this heavy focus on external time management and external organization. So this heavy focus on it being an external behavioral-based disorder led to the rise of these executive function coaches, right? You guys have all heard the term executive functioning coach, right? And these are these people that will, hey, they'll sit with the kids and they'll clean out their backpacks for them, right? That's the telltale sign, right? The messy backpack with the papers everywhere. They'll sit with them and they'll clean out their backpacks. They'll organize papers into folders. And they'll sit with the kid while they do work to make sure that they don't go on a million different tabs during homework time and start playing a game during homework and, hold them accountable while they do work. Just sit there and watch them, right? That's your classic executive functioning coach. And there's no agency, like we mentioned ASHA before, the ASHA, the American Speech and Language Association, that makes you a certified speech and language pathologist. There's no agency to certify coaches. Any of you right now could hop on your phone right now and make a website, I'm an executive functioning coach. I'll work with your kid for $500 an hour, and I'll clean your backpack. Anyone can do it. There's none of that. So there's no, on the West Coast you have something called educational therapy. You guys have heard of educational therapy? Question?
I just keep asking questions, I found.
No, go for it.
But don't kids benefit from being redirected? Isn't it helpful if a child is supposed to write 2 sentences and after every single word their head is all over, and if someone just goes, read to make sentences now, isn't that helpful to be redirected?
It's helpful in the short term. So that's not a true thing that you want. That's not going to help the kid long term. That's the biggest thing.
Most of all, it upsets my son very much every time somebody keeps on redirecting.
Yeah.
He gets very angry.
There you go.
Want someone to name back.
Correct. So we need to transition from these external to the internal. So all of these, the rise of executive functioning coaches, the rise of these kids being sent to inappropriate therapies, now with this switch from external to internal, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out and said no educational therapy. Many social skills groups have been shown to be ineffective for kids with ADHD, and they could make behaviors even worse. There's research to show that social skills groups, where it's eye contact, topic maintenance, circles of communication, your typical social skills group you see at schools, can actually make ADHD behaviors worse. And then we have to transition to, like, has anyone here with an ADHD child had their kids in a social skills group?
They're few and far between here. They're hard to access. That's why nobody's raising their hands.
Good.
But
Cool.
I'm rethinking that whole idea that maybe we need them. I'm not sure.
You don't need them. So social skills groups, ABA, cognitive behavioral therapy is ineffective for kids with ADHD. We'll talk about that. EMDR, which is the eye movement training, and these brain balance centers, which are a total joke, just preying on desperate parents. The American Academy of Pediatrics had to come out and say, no, we don't recommend any of this. They came out and said, no, all of this is ridiculous. It's not helpful. Right now, we're talking about medication management, which is important for parents to learn more about medication for 5 and up. Parent training is crucial for ADHD, for parents to set up structure and accountability and use different language and scaffolding in the home. And then, if they are going to do therapy, it has to be focused on the internal, long-term skill building instead of just accommodations. So that's the biggest thing. The more that we accommodate these kids with these 504 plans and these 80-page IEPs, right? So we have to start to focus on long-term skill building instead of accommodations, because that question before of, hey, can you write 2 sentences poking, you're prompting that child, you're accommodating that child. Let's teach them skills so they don't need those prompts anymore. Okay, so we'll talk even more about that. Any questions so far? Yes?
So the executive functioning, I mean, I'm new to this game.
It's cool.
But the executive functioning coaches that I reached out to said that they do build skills and it's not supposed to be like a long-term thing. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but they say that
What skills are they building?
they're teaching them how to have the tools to organize themselves and make their own schedules and whatever.
Everyone needs systems in place. Someone that has the executive function
Yeah.
has the systems in place. But if we could teach the systems to get put into place, isn't that
Or like
what
study skills.
someone
or
like an
whatever.
executive function coach would do? Or an ABA is going to give you the systems to be put in place.
It's a lot deeper. It's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot deep. It's a lot deeper than that.
I'm also new, but
I'm just trying to figure it out.
It's a
I'm
lot.
trying
It's a lot deeper than behavioral. So we can't keep looking at behavioral. We have to look at, and we're going to dive deeper into exactly what we're talking about. So I think all your questions will be answered.
Does it change based on the age group,
In terms of what?
whether an executive function coach is helpful or not?
It really, like I said before, there's no credentialing agency to become an executive functioning coach. Anybody can do it. It's basically like tutoring, like, oh, I can tutor your child, or those kinds of things.
Correct, but
So every coach is different, but
If you're giving tools to a 5-year-old, you could kind of prevent the diagnosis before it happens.
no, if they have ADHD or ADHD, you're not going to cure the ADHD.
So
But-
once you have it,
Yes,
yeah.
correct.
You can't age
Correct.
it, nothing, it's just you have.
You can have enough skills where you're living independently, it's not affecting your daily life. It's all about quality of life.
no, I really like.
The parent training that the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending, what specialist is doing that training?
It all depends on the background and training. So lots of social workers are doing it. ADHD dude is a social worker. It really all depends on, because there's no credentialing agency for executive functioning in ADHD, it all depends on what their background is. So learn about, their training, like are they involved with CHAD? Have they worked with, neuropsychs and done diagnostics and those sorts of things. So it's all about their experience. It's not so much about their title and those kinds of things. Like obviously I'm a speech and language pathologist who has experience in this. There's social workers, there's OTs. So it really just depends on their overall experience with this population. Okay? So, give a question? No? Good? Okay. So, we're talking a lot about this switch now from an attention disorder to a performance disorder. And we're talking more and more about executive functions. So there is a huge push now for some of the great pioneers in this field to change the name of ADHD. It's a terrible name for the disorder. It causes these kids to be sent to inappropriate therapies, causes them to be called lazy, disinterested, parents get blamed, like, oh, just get the kid a coffee, he'll be fine, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of push now to change the name.
Sorry, I feel like once the child is diagnosed. On the contrary, he's no longer called lazy. He's, poor kid, he has ADHD.
If only that would be true. I can't. You can have the diagnosis of ADHD. So kids are diagnosed ADHD. It's on their IEP. It's on their 504. And then you reach out to the school, and he didn't do the work because he doesn't. He's disinterested. So it's sort of a label that just follows people. So it's hard. Yeah.
Sorry, I know you're trying to get.
No, it's cool. Yeah.
So you're talking about performance, but what about, because I don't know, the way I see my kids with ADHD is also the way that they take in information is
Correct.
different. So it's not just what they could spit out and their knowledge, the way that they take it is also that they're struggling.
Correct. And that's internal language. So if you saw the title of the presentation, it's Executive Functions and Internal Language. So that's exactly what we're talking about. So we'll talk about that. So some of the names that have been thrown out there to change the name of ADHD to self-regulation deficit disorder, delayed gratification disorder, attention to the future disorder. And now one that's really gaining steam is VAST, variable attention stimulus trait. So I think that was Dr. Hallowell, might have been there or somebody else. But yeah, that's starting to gain some traction, but it still focuses on attention. So now, what we're really looking to have done is build this connection. So now we're looking at ADHD being reframed as EFDD, Executive Functioning Developmental Delay, or Executive Functioning Developmental Disorder. So ADHD is the preeminent disorder of executive functions. Can you have executive functioning delays and not have ADHD? Of course you can. But if you have ADHD, you have a disorder of executive functions. Okay? So you can have an executive functioning developmental delay, developmental disorder, but ADHD is about executive functioning. Yep?
How do you make that distinction? How do you know the difference? If you have a kid that has executive functioning, how do you know if they're ADHD or not?
So it's really all about how chronic and how significant the issues are. So executive functioning delays and executive functioning challenges are going to manifest here and there, but someone with ADHD is going to struggle on a consistent daily basis every single day, academic, socially, and at home. So it's all the overall. But ADHD we're looking to have this reframed and relabeled as executive functioning developmental delay. And we're moving past, yes.
I'm so sorry.
It's cool. I'm gonna pass you the mic. What?
Is it better to have a diagnosis, or does one need to have a diagnosis of ADHD?
For what?
I'm just starting on this journey, so I don't.
It's cool.
I don't know if I should go ahead with the evaluation and then everyone's
You can, you just have to make sure it's a thorough evaluation. Don't have one of those evaluations where the kid's sitting with the woman in the room for 3 hours and they go home and say, you're diagnosed. Make sure it's an evaluation where they go to the school, they observe, they interview all the teachers, they interview you. It should really take place over a week. There's a lot of therapists out there that are so booked and so busy and don't have time, where it's sit with me for 2 hours, I'll give you the color Stroop test, and I'll do, the Tower test. It's like, oh, he has ADHD. So, everyone's different. There's good and bad SLPs, there's good and bad psychs. But, having a diagnosis certainly does help to better understand your child. If it's, definitive, yes, this is an ADHD kid after a long diagnosis, yes, that can be quite empowering to finally have that diagnosis in that label. But what we're looking to do now is reframe ADHD as an executive functioning developmental disorder. Yes?
Well, we save questions till the end because let us just get through. A lot of the questions will be answered as
My daughter did do the neuropsych, the thorough, over a long course of time, and came out that she doesn't have ADHD, but she does have executive function delays. So would the same treatments work on somebody that has the delays, even though they're not considered ADHD?
Yes. Yes, it's executive. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yep.
How do you know, how do you differentiate a learning disability as well, like dyslexia? Is it executive functioning, or is it part of dyslexia, or
Typically, there's some, typically things like dyslexia are typically comorbid with other things. Most often ADHD and dyslexia go really hand in hand. And there's a lot of executive functioning involved in the processing of language. So it's really, and we're going to talk about internal language with this. So in terms of dyslexia getting resolved, a lot of it is strengthening of that executive functioning system to process language. So we'll definitely talk more about that now. Cool. So we'll do questions at the end, and we'll dive deep. Nice. So we're moving away from attention deficit. We're moving away from hyperactivity and attentiveness. Now we're going to talk about the 4 pillars of what ADHD, EFDD truly are. I've already talked about some of them. They all begin with the word self. Who remembers? Let's think. Self-regulation. Number 1. So self-regulation, the ability to regulate your emotions, your language, your body, your behavior in various environments towards various stimuli. This is that emotional aspect of the brain we talked about before in the very beginning. The ability to regulate one's emotions, language, body, behavior. It's not about hyperactivity, it's about self-regulation. Self-regulation is self-regulation deficit disorder. An inability to regulate yourself to begin work, persist through it, and finish it. The ability to regulate your emotions in social experiences. The ability to regulate your emotions when you're asked to do something outside of your comfort zone. Self-regulation. Next.
Self-motivation.
That's coming. Self-awareness. So the ability to truly understand how you present yourself to others and be aware of your strengths and needs. So this is something I talk about with parents all the time when they first call me to get their son into therapy with us. Is they'll say, hey, how am I possibly going to get him to your center? How am I possibly going to get him on Zoom? He doesn't want to do therapy. He thinks nothing is wrong, and I'm just crazy. This is what I hear all the time. My son doesn't want to do therapy at all. He will never get on that Zoom with you. He thinks there's nothing wrong with him and everything is fine. ADHD truly is a disorder of self-awareness. So you see these kids bouncing off the walls, being hyperactive, being inattentive, not doing that. It's a true lack of self-awareness where they don't understand and truly grasp their differences from others and their areas of need. To be self-aware that, hey, if I don't study, I might do pretty poorly on that test coming up. Or, hey, if I don't reach out to my peer, that might negatively impact that relationship. Or, hey, if I scream at my mom because she told me to get off of Minecraft, that's going to be a problem and I might lose my games later. Right? Self-motivation towards non-preferred tasks. So I cannot tell you how many parents reach out to me and say, there's no way my son or daughter, has a self-motivation disorder. They can play Minecraft for 8-10 hours a day. They can play Fortnite all night. They don't have to eat or sleep. They can just keep playing. They're motivated to play Fortnite. They love it. So it's Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, and Discord. Watch out for Discord. Discord's bad.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yes.
Oh, I saw it on your page.
Yes, Discord's no good. Bad place. So those are the things that they are motivated towards because it provides them instant gratification. But things that are non-preferred, that have delayed gratification, like homework, schoolwork, exercise, all sorts of things, that's where we're going to see the issue. So self-motivation towards non-preferred, new, challenging, novel tasks. Got a packed house here, I like it. Standing room only. Self-evaluation and the ability to learn from past experiences and apply it to the present. Because what are we constantly seeing from these ADHD, EFDD kids? They repeat the same mistake over and over and over. They could lose their phone. They could lose their Xbox. They could be grounded for the weekend. You could lecture them and give them the most beautiful parenting lecture of all time, where you were so clear and you were so understanding, and you could walk away like, wow, I really gave it to him perfectly. And then what happens? They make the same mistake tomorrow. an inability to self-evaluate and learn from past experiences. So the typical punishments, the typical consequences may not work. It has to be more natural and those kinds of things, and framed to them in different ways. So this right here is the 4 pillars of EFDD ADHD. Self-regulation, self-awareness, self-motivation, self-evaluation. So these are the 4 pillars that we're going to start to think about. And they are all founded upon, so 4 pillars founded upon self-language. And we're going to dive even deeper into the self-language aspect of it. Okay? So this is where, remember, you're going to see me doing this a lot today. External, internal. External, internal. So in the past, hyperactivity, inattentiveness, attention deficit. Now we know to look inward at these skills that are significantly impaired. Okay? Okay, so now the 3 zones of executive function. Because in the past, this was viewed as a purely academic-based disorder, right? So yes, there's academic executive functioning. That's a big piece of it. Being able to be successful in school, independent in school, right? Get tasks done, get good grades, and actually turn your work in after you do it. There's also home executive functioning, which more often than not tends to be self-regulation towards parents, and not the constant screaming and the fighting and the toxic stress in the home. Also the ability to complete non-preferred tasks in the home, and not just be sucked into the phone or the screen and the games at home, which is very important for kids to have varied experiences away from screens. And there's social executive functioning. So we talked before about your typical social skills group being ineffective for kids with ADHD, but when that group follows social executive functioning practices, then we can see some progress, because we're focused on the true social executive functioning skills. So social skills is your eye contact, your topic maintenance, your turn taking, your circles of communication. Social executive functioning is perspective taking skills, the ability to understand what kinds of thoughts you put into others' heads. And then there's something called situational awareness that kids with ADHD really struggle with, which is the ability to stand back and read the room and observe the room, process that information before you enter that social dynamic. So the ability to have situational awareness and read the room. Perspective taking, read the room, social reciprocity, 50-50 relationships, and social relatedness. That's social executive functioning. Okay? Excellent. Making good time. Okay. So a very important thing that we have to learn to do, is define executive functions. So depending on who you're looking at Peg Dawson, Smart But Scattered, Dr. Russell Barkley, George McCloskey, whoever it may be, you're going to get a different definition of what executive functioning is depending on who you're reading. And most people are just going to give you a list of the skills as a definition. That's not helpful. We have to define it. I happen to love Dr. Russell Barkley's definition of what executive functions are. So he defines executive functions as an action to the self. When we take an action to the self designed to change one's self, to change self's future, to avoid a distant consequence or to attain a positive consequence. So we use our executive functioning when we stop focusing and responding to the external outside world, responding to external stimuli. We stop, we inhibit, we regulate, and we go inward. And we focus on the self, and we change our behavior to change our future. So executive functions are when we take an action to the self. So we stop ourselves. We take an action to the self. We stop ourselves from what you would have done on impulse. So there's that word impulse that goes hand in hand with ADHD, right? But we're not focusing on impulse and behavioral stuff anymore. We know you're stopping yourself from what you would have done on impulse without stopping to think. So the ADHD brain thrives on stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. That's why the brain is the way it is, with very low levels of dopamine, vasopressin, serotonin, oxytocin, right? Stimulus response. Everything's stimulus response. which is the reason why these kids are so prone to really hardcore screen addictions, game addictions, and they can hyper-focus on these games for hours and hours, and it's so important for these parents to have screen time structure in the home and limit the screens, because they, it's the same thing as a gambling addiction. So it's basically, if you have a child with ADHD that is developing a gaming addiction, and you're asking them to do homework when the game is right there, it's the same thing as asking someone with a gambling addiction to go sit in a casino and read a book. Right? It's the exact same thing. They can't do it. They can't resist playing that Xbox, that Switch, that computer that has tons of games on it. When it's still in the same room, you're going to ask them to do homework in that room, there has to be greater structure because of the stimulus response. So we need to teach them to do more of a stop and think. This is the internal. Okay? So, executive functions are the tools that we all use as humans to turn away from the seductions of the moment and subject yourself to adversity or hardships to change a distant future. And this is basically how college works, right? You go through 4 years of college with basically no money, eating ramen every day, going to classes, wearing sweatpants, doing all those kinds of things, just to get that piece of paper after 4 years, because that paper is going to help you make more money than if you didn't have it for a career. It helps you long term. So we use our executive functions to subject ourselves to non-instant gratification to work towards it. So all deferred gratification requires self-regulation. Okay? So executive functions are the foundation of all learning. So why aren't these skills a core focus of education? Why haven't executive functions found their way into schools? Why are people like me needed to train school districts and school staffs on executive functions? Why is executive functioning training not a super part, a mandatory part of getting a master's in education or a master's in speech, OT, PT, all those things? I can tell you right now, for my master's degree, we talked about executive functioning for like 2 days. So it needs to become a core facet. And part of that is because we can't effectively measure executive functions the same way we measure other skills. So we talked about this before. You can have a percentile and ranking for reading, writing, math, articulation, language, but we can't have that distinct number and ranking for executive functions. So executive function tests are all informal checklists the parents fill out and do. So in turn, those tests are pretty cheap. And these big corporations and big organizations make a heck of a lot more money by making these math tests, reading tests, and more academic-based tests. So teachers now have to teach to the test to increase the scores on all these other state exams. So if we can't put a number and a label to executive functions, then there's no way that you can make money off of measuring executive functioning skills and making it part of the program. But that's for another story. That's a deeper issue. So in terms of measuring executive functions, the way we do it with the GrowNow model is it's all about from prompt dependence to independence. This is how executive functioning development and progress in therapy, progress in school, this is how we can measure it. So individuals with ADHD and executive function are typically very prompt dependent. They are reliant on the adults around them with their fully developed brains to constantly prompt them to stay on task and to do the right thing and to not have that stimulus response, right? So how can we remove prompts, fade prompts over time to develop independence? So prompt dependence on others, reliance on the self. Prompt dependent on others, reliance to the self. That's always the goal of ADHD executive functioning therapy. And part of what I was saying before with executive function coaches, sitting there, cleaning out the backpacks, cleaning out folders, sitting with them while they work. What happens as soon as that coach leaves and the coach is no longer there anymore? What happens? There you go. They're right back to where they were. Because you have now taught this child to be prompt dependent on that coach. So this lack of focus on prompt dependence versus independence has become a real significant problem in education, right? Because now, as in special education, of course, we have our IEPs, our 504s, and in education now we see IEPs that are 60, 70, 80 pages long, every single service. And one of the big things with ADHD and executive functioning now is give my kid a 504 with every possible accommodation you possibly can get, right? I want every copy and pasted accommodation on that 504 that you have in your goal bag. Give my kid everything. They can hand things in late, preferential seating, they can do tests in certain rooms, those kinds of things. And we're kind of born into this whole IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and this world of IEPs and 504s. But now that this has been going on now for several decades, now, recently, America now leads the entire world in first semester college dropouts. And so many of those first semester college dropouts had IEPs, 504s, they had the great grades, they were able to get accepted into that college, they were accepted full force, but once they got to that college, the IEP is gone, the 504 is gone, the accommodations are gone, and these kids are sitting in their room, they're not checking their school email, they don't know how to set up office hours with their professors, they can't leave there's video games in their dorm, they don't want to leave, they're skipping class, and they can't leave their dorm to go to the library to go get work done. So a lot of these kids that are dropping out of college, it's not due to academics, it's not due to a lack of success in high school, it's due to great difficulty with executive functions. Because we don't focus on this in education. We don't want kids to be independent when they leave high school. We want them to be compliant, right, with all of the work that we teach them. But there's a huge difference between 12th grade and college, and that's becoming a serious issue. So, prompt dependence, of course, is when the adults are acting as the child's executive functioning system. So all you parents out there with kids with ADHD, start to think, where is my son most prompt dependent, my son or daughter? In the mornings, for the morning routine. Is it prompt after prompt after prompt to get them out the door? The bedtime routine, getting started on work, texting a friend and getting out. Where are you acting as their executive function? Where are they prompt dependent versus independent? And the longer that you act as their executive functioning system, the longer these skills will be delayed because they have to learn the skills to develop independence. So we're talking a lot about independence and what the true predictors of success are, right? So we're talking about all the issues with education and what's wrong with it. What does the research show us? What are the true predictors of success? What are the huge decades-long longitudinal studies show us of what are the qualities an individual needs to have to be successful, to live independently, to have a career, financial independence, and be able to start a family and to have a home and all those sorts of things. You know, what's taught in school versus what does the research actually show us? Number one, the ability to independently form and maintain social relationships. This is highly correlated to the research. The ability to make and keep friends over time is a huge indicator to long-term success. And of course, social executive functioning. Number two, the ability to independently manage your emotions. Because we all know those negative experiences, those roadblocks, those issues are inevitable. So we have to be able to manage our emotions through those difficult times to persevere, be resilient, and move on. You know, it's those individuals that really, really have difficulty managing their emotions and may allow their emotions to get the best of them that really have trouble, persevering through that. And the ability to manage your life and independent problem solving. So the ability to figure out, okay, when do I have to go grocery shopping? When can I go? What do I have to get? And planning out your week in terms of your diet and your fitness and your relationships and your friends and your job and being able to figure out the hours you're working, how you get there, what you do when something comes up. So the ability to independently problem solve and manage your life is so unbelievably important. So these three skills are the three true indicators for long-term success, all revolving around executive functioning. Okay? So, diving deeper now into the Harvard Center of the Developing Child, and all that they're showing is that, hey, these executive functioning skills are the greatest predictor we have for success. Executive functioning skills are a greater predictor of success than IQ. Kids who develop strong EF skills experience lifelong benefits. And there's no better time than now to help our kids develop these skills and gain these skills because of what all this research shows us. And they're developed through varied experiences and interpersonal relationships. So we can probably very quickly go through this part. So we talked before about kids with ADHD want to stay in their small little comfort zone. And this is such a powerful image. I use this with so many of my students, of this idea of the comfort zone, where you feel safe and in control. And you have to persevere through the fear zone to get to the learning zone and the growth zone. And all of these bullet points right here on the left are really all you teachers out there. That's your ideal student. You want every student in your classroom to have those qualities. Low threat, high challenged, emotionally engaged. They can take risks in thinking. They're comfortable making mistakes. Trial and error. They follow feedback. This is the growth mindset, the great work of Dr. Carol Dweck, who published the book Mindset, a great book about executive function. So this is super important. How are we doing on time? Good? Sweet. But it's important to also remember the world that kids are growing up in today. So there has never in history been a more difficult time to be a kid, and there's never in history been a more difficult time to be a parent. Because let's look at what's happening here. And I love this quote from Malcolm Gladwell, the author: "We value natural, effortless accomplishment over achievement through effort." So back in the day, the dream career for everybody was what? To become a doctor or an astronaut, right? Both. And what's the dream job now? A YouTuber. Everybody wants to be a YouTuber. Everybody wants to be a YouTuber. Basically what they want to do is they want to play games, record themselves playing games, and hope that people will pay to watch them play games. That's what they think is going to happen. So natural, effortless accomplishment, okay? So these kids don't care about what's happening behind the scenes. They want fun and results now. Kids are growing up in an instant gratification world. High-speed internet, Google, touchscreens, YouTube, Amazon, next day, same day delivery sometimes, right? Sometimes it shows up on your front street, you forgot you ordered it. Yeah, there you go. That as well. And video games, now there's no more, hey, wait until Saturday, we'll go to the video game store together. Now the video game just downloads off the internet onto the hard drive on the system the second it comes out. So this is an instant gratification world. So this goes back to that conversation before. Is it truly ADHD, or is it an executive functioning delay due to these issues? And of course COVID made it way worse. But here, kids today have real trouble with long-term goals. If there's too long of a delay, kids have trouble with it because they want instant gratification. And a big thing to remember is kids with ADHD especially, and most kids today, really struggle with anything that involves a learning curve. So if they're not good at it, the first time they try it, that's it, they're done. I'm done, I'm not doing it. I have to be great at it the first time. If it takes time to build competence and skills, I'm done. I have to be good at it the first time I try it. And kids today need resilience to persevere. And if there's ever a conversation of, hey, we're going from an IEP to a 504, that's a very delicate conversation, right? You're not taking services away from my kid, right? But we have to start to think about is how prompt dependent are those services keeping your child? Because schools and educators need to take a research into practice approach with fading prompts and internal skills.
Isn't this
So-
what therapy is supposed to do?
But often it
The idea is to
often it-
mainstream.
Aren't we supposed
The
to give
idea
our
is to use it
students
until
the
you don't need it
skill
anymore.
and wean them off?
but that's really not what's happening. So if you think about it,
That's not what's happening.
No.
It's supposed to happen.
It's supposed to happen, yeah. So therapy is supposed to focus on quality of life and life skills. But the way IEPs and 504s work is it's all about what's helping this child access the curriculum. What's helping them there. So that these therapists are tracking data in the actual sessions of what's happening when they're with them, but there's little work of what's happening in the natural environment. Yep.
Sorry, I don't know what's 504?
A 504 is a step down from an IEP. So an IEP is an individualized education plan that is federally mandated. You have to follow it or you can get sued. A 504 is not federally mandated. It's just a list of accommodations. So this child doesn't need a special education 504, an IEP. They need a 504 where they can, sit in the front. They can hand things in late, that kind of stuff.
It's based on a different law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's for, if your child doesn't have an IEP, doesn't have a learning disability, but they have psychomotor slowing due to some physical condition or diabetes or something, needs an accommodation, a 504 does that. Sometimes if you have a diagnosis of ADHD, you don't get an IEP, but you actually generate that document with the school. So if your child gets extra time on Regents.
Go back to what?
Right.
This right
School
here?
has to have that in the file, otherwise they can't give your child extra time. That's just semantics.
Retained in a grade, suspended and expelled, and more than $3 billion a year spent on these kids. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the different parenting styles. How does this sound? Let's get serious. Okay, so this is a great image here that shows the 4 different parenting styles that there are. So we have permissive parenting, which is child-driven, rarely gives or enforces rules, overindulges the child to avoid conflict, which is what we see a lot in the instant gratification dysregulation world. There's neglectful parenting and authoritative parenting, which are basically criminal and creating trauma. Then there's authoritative parenting, which sounds way too much like authoritarian, but when we learn about authoritative parenting, it solves problems together with the child, sets clear rules and expectations, open communication, and natural consequences. So we look over here at authoritative, let's talk about it. Reciprocal, high expectations, clear standards, democratic, assertive, flexible. So permissive parenting, this is when we have our low demands, high responsiveness, open access to screens and games, no consequences, low expectations, and not allowing the child to struggle or take accountability. So what the research shows us is that permissive parenting style leads to insecurity, avoidance of tasks, lack of self-regulation, poor social skills, and that fixed mindset.
And those parents are always so surprised when their children show no gratitude for anything they do. I do everything for my child, and they don't appreciate a thing. That's the result of that type of parenting.
Beautifully said. I'm going to steal that for next time. Thank you. So parents can unintentionally, this is not always an intentional choice or an intentional thing, but that permissive parenting style can really inhibit executive functioning development. So, start to think. Doing tasks for your child that they're capable of doing on their own. You're enabling over-dependence on you. Constantly prompting them, keeping them prompt-dependent. Okay? Lack of free play and unstructured time away from screens. Solving problems for them, inhibiting independent problem solving. Speaking for them, inhibiting self-advocacy. Micromanaging their academic performance, telling them what they have to do for homework and reminding them to hand it in. So really acting as their executive functioning system too much and not giving them enough chance to strengthen it themselves. So right around 14, 15 is from what I've seen within my practice is what I call the independence tipping point. So when their inflexibility is accommodated for so long, 14, 15 years, this is really where we start to see lots of rigidity, and it takes a lot of work to really flip and change that. Their inflexibility has been accommodated for so long, this child is now fully resistant to any therapy, any help, any sort of assistance. This is when the self-awareness is totally off. There's nothing wrong with me, everything's fine. Keep over-accommodating me. I'm fine with being over-dependent on you. I can play games as much as I want. All my friends are doing it. Leave me alone. Okay? So still continue to be dependent on adults and parents. So that title of authoritative parenting, I refer to it as reciprocal parenting. Because changing the name of it is so important. Labels are important, right? because we have to start to focus on a 50-50 relationship between parent and child. So like that example before of I do so much for my child, I do so much for my child. Okay, well let's give this child some competent roles in the home. Let's give them chores and responsibilities, yes.
How do you know when to stop?
When to stop what?
Stop being that parent that's so on top of them and letting them fail. You don't want your kids to go out of school. You don't want them to study.
They have to fail and think so they can get better. They have to learn, they have to have mistakes in order to learn.
But they will understand the concept of, I won't remind you to study for your test.
So consequences for school and not doing well in school are best taken care of in the natural environment of the school building. So some of the best IEPs and 504s I've seen is when kids get a poor grade or they have a missing assignment, it instantly triggers a one-on-one meeting with the teacher or the counselor. Something like that, right? So those kinds of things. So you know when to stop when you're over-prompting constantly. Yes?
I have a question, because you're saying that their brain is wired in a certain way, that they are more, they can forget more, and they need the prompts and whatever, so you stop, they fail the test. He's not wired to remember the next time, so that's not going to make him, oh my God, I failed last time, I better study this time so I don't fail this time. He's going to fail again and again and again if I don't continue prompting him.
Not if you give the tools.
So what
So, again, we'll get to the tools. Let's get to the tools. I love the passion. Keep the passion coming. If you don't have that kind of passion, don't raise your hand. Period. So here's a quote that I love. Flexibility is cultivated. Inflexibility is accommodated. Okay? Great quote from the ADHD dude. Think about that when it comes to parenting styles. Okay? So now we can really start to dive into internal language and what it is. This is the meat and potatoes, people. Okay? This is my favorite thing to present on. Let's talk about it. Okay? So what is internal language? What is it that creates the deficit of self-regulation, self-motivation, self-awareness, self-evaluation? What can we start to do? What is the internal skills? What are the foundations that are really causing all of these issues? Okay? So this idea of internal language came from Dr. Russell Barkley, the worldwide leader on executive functions, and the famous Dr. Lev Vygotsky. So Dr. Vygotsky did all this work about privatized language, and Dr. Russell Barkley took his work and brought it into executive functions. Okay? So here's a picture of Dr. Lev Vygotsky here. So he was the one, he's the famous psychologist, who discovered that over time, language goes from public to private. Okay, so he was the one who discovered that language goes from external to internal. So this little thing here, from ages 0 to 3, Vygotsky found that all language is outward. All language is expressive. 0 to 3-year-olds emit language to others. At this point, there is no self-talk. There is no voice inside of their heads. All language is outward, expressive, it can be heard, it can be measured. There is no internal voice developed yet.
From 0 to 3?
From 0 to 3. Yep. And then from 3 to 5, kids will begin to talk to themselves. So language, so from 0 to 3, language is kids describe their world. And I see this now with my 2-year-old. I walk with her down the street, it's dog, cat, bus, car. She's just describing the world around her. It's description of the world. But between the ages of 3 to 5, language goes from description to self-instruction. And it starts to be aimed towards the self. So between the ages of 3 to 5, kids will begin to talk to themselves. Language is aimed at themselves, but it's all external. It's all public. It can be all heard. You put a 5-year-old to bed at night, you put your ear to the door, what do you hear? They're talking to themselves. There's no one there, and they're talking to themselves. That's what 5-year-olds do, right? 3 to 5. They're talking to themselves, but it's external, and it can be heard. But it's between the ages of 5 to 7 when the magic starts to happen. Okay? This is when the magic starts to happen. The face and the larynx start to become suppressed, and the kids will begin to be able to talk to themselves internally and privately. Internalized, privatized speech. And then between the ages of 9 to 12, this skill becomes fully developed. Internal privatized speech, the voice inside of your head. Okay? So, we discovered that language goes from public to private, from description to self-instruction. And this is because below 5 years of age, language has not yet gained control over the motor strip of the brain. So we cannot use language to inhibit our motor actions. And then between the ages of 5 and 7, because now there's been more diverse experiences, more relationships, more time to allow the brain to strengthen, language gains control over the motor strip. And I love this quote from Dr. Russell Barkley, what you say starts to control what you do. So we are able to use language to regulate our behavior, regulate our choices, regulate our actions. We are able.
Language.
What's up?
Your own language.
Your own.
From his perspective.
You're talking to yourself. So you have an internal privatized voice. You're talking to your brain, and it's changing your actions. So you're taking an action to the self via language. Okay? So think about this. This tasks that we work on as SLPs. Okay? Try right now to talk to your brain, have a conversation with your brain, and talk to the person next to you. Go ahead. Give it a shot. Can anyone do it? No, because it's the same. It's the same system. It is the same part of the brain. It is the same cognitive system. The same parts of my brain that are lighting up right now when I'm talking to you all outward and expressively are the same parts of the brain that I use to talk to myself. It's the same part. All verbal thinking is speech to the self, but the face and the larynx are suppressed. And there's been some fascinating studies where you put little electrodes all over your face, all over your larynx, all over your throat, and you ask someone to engage in totally silent, private, internalized speech. They can just talk to their brains, they can recite the words to their favorite song, and those little electrodes are going to pick up those movements as if those words were said out loud. But only the electrodes can pick up those movements. We can't see it with the naked eye. It's the exact same thing with visual imagery and sports performance. You can put electrodes all over someone's arm and ask them to visualize throwing a ball across the room, and those electrodes pick up on those impulses as if they did throw the ball.
Wow.
The power of the internal visualization.
It's like when you're counting something in your head, then you can't have a conversation with someone else.
Basically, yes. Yeah. Okay? So it's the same cognitive system, the executive functioning language connection. Okay? So, as language increases, we have language moving up and executive functioning acquisition. So these two things really move together in harmony. Okay? So we're starting to dive deeper. We've talked a lot about self-talk and internalized privatized speech, and we're going to talk more about that imagination component I was talking about, right? So developing that imagination. What is the imagination and what is the connection to executive functions? So we need to see how do visual imagery and self-talk work together in harmony. So I think for this part of the presentation, I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Come on up. I love it, I love it, I love it.
All right.
So, come on up, take your coat off, stay a while. See what I see. Okay, so very quickly, I'm going to ask you this question. This presentation is going to end at whatever time, hopefully in about 2 hours. Good, okay? So it's going to end, and then walk us through, with as much detail as possible, everything you're going to do from the moment this ends until you go home and fall asleep. Walk us through it with as much detail as possible.
So gonna leave here, exit through the door, get into the, I was gonna say parking lot, but I actually parked down in Dunkin' Donuts, which I was not supposed to do, but I did. And park in Dunkin' Donuts, and then I am going to get into my car, drive home, get into my garage, get out of the car, walk over to the door, Shabbat coded in, get into the house, check on my kids, everybody's asleep, walk back over to the door, set the alarm, get into my bed, and then hopefully go to sleep, scroll Instagram a little, and then go to sleep.
That was absolutely perfect. I could not have asked for a better Volunteer. That was perfect. So the whole need for a volunteer was to see how visual imagery and self-talk work together in harmony. And she did it absolutely beautiful to a T.
SLP.
She's an SLP.
She knows what you want to do.
Did you?
No.
Okay. So, who noticed what she was doing?
Physically acting out what she was going to do.
Gesturing. And that slide was there the whole time. Okay? So she was gesturing through it. She was pointing at the buttons. She was walking over. She was scrolling Instagram. She gestured through it. That is because you have a great executive functioning system, and visual imagery and self-talk work together in harmony. So let's think about our ADHD, EFDD kids. They don't gesture. Think about it. Ask them about what they're planning on doing. Ask them about the past. They'll tell you the whole story with their hands down, their hands in their lap. They're not going to gesture through things because ADHD is a disconnect, a weakening and a disconnect between nonverbal and verbal working memory. So this is the foundation of executive functioning. So this is internal language. Internal language is nonverbal and verbal working memory. Nonverbal working memory is a fancy term for visual imagery. So visual imagery is nonverbal working memory. Verbal working memory is self-talk. That's internal language. Internal language are these two skills working together in harmony. But if you have ADHD, you have EFDD, these two skills are weakened and disconnected, and they do not work together in harmony, and that creates a whole mess of issues. Yep.
So kids who do gesture, you're telling me, don't have ADHD?
Say that again?
How about kids who do gesture, but still have other symptoms?
Are they truly gesturing like is it a true gesture like our friend had? Is it like a true deep kind of thing?
Does that mean like if they don't do that, then if they do gesture, then they don't have ADHD and EFD?
That's a great question. I would probably argue that they're not gesturing appropriately. I would probably, maybe they gestured one time, but maybe they gestured over a really motivating topic, like being able to go home and play Minecraft or something. But the ability to do that kind of thing, the mundane tasks of putting in a code and doing this and going to Dunkin' Donuts to get your car, all that kind of stuff, that's not going to trigger the whole thing. Okay? So let's dive through this quickly. Yep.
Isn't that a difference between right and left brain?
So
Verbal versus non-verbal?
it's the prefrontal cortex. Both of these are in the prefrontal cortex. It kind of looks that way based on the image, but I basically just took the other one and put those words over it.
Yeah, it's front to back.
Yeah. So it's right here. Non-verbal and verbal. Yep. That could certainly affect it, yeah. And a lot of that is seen as a speech and language issue, but most often a lot of kids that have articulation delays, are late talkers, a lot of it comes from executive functioning and a disconnect of internal language. So taking an executive functioning approach to early intervention speech therapy is really what needs to start happening. Definitely.
So we're really getting to the point where you're gonna learn the skills and tools and what needs to be done, because that's where we are at this point. So can we let them, I know some people, the hour's late, some people wanna go, so let's get into this. There will be time after for questions. Mike is not leaving. He said, I'll stay as long as you need, but I think a lot of people do wanna see, really this is it.
How are we doing on time overall?
I think we probably wanna finish in about 10 minutes. Is that
Who's
okay?
itching to leave?
I was just gonna say.
Who's staying with me?
Type your questions into your phone, so that.
No, Mike is gonna say, when we get to the end of the slides, he's staying to answer questions. I told him, as long as people are here, keep going, but I also noticed that people are, filtering out, and I know that most of us really wanna hear, I'm dying to hear the end of this, because this is very, very relevant to me. And I think a lot of parents wanna know, okay, now we definitely have identified the problem, we really wanna know, well, what do we do about it? And
Okay.
that's where we are.
Okay, I will speed through a couple of things here. So this right here is your true list of executive functioning skills. On here, you will not see time management, you will not see organization, you will not see task initiation. It is these skills. First, it is self-awareness, which develops quite early in the baby stages. We learn to inhibit our impulses. Then comes nonverbal working memory. Nonverbal working memory is the foundation of all executive functioning. All executive functioning starts with nonverbal working memory. It is so unbelievably important that we remember that. The visual imagery system of the brain, and we'll talk about that a little bit deeper. Next is verbal working memory, which is the self-talk we talked about. And then once those two systems are working together in harmony, individuals then learn emotional self-regulation and the ability to regulate their own emotions internally instead of being environmentally dependent on how they're supposed to feel. And then self-motivation, where kids learn to internalize their motivation, and it's not just the star charts, the stickers, the candy, and those kinds of things. So they learn to internalize their motivation. And then we all know our young kids, our preschool age kids, our kindergarten age kids, what's the most important thing in the world for those kids to do at that age?
Play.
Play. Why?
That's how they
So
learn.
that's their learning is that's their nonverbal working memory working.
Okay, wow. So basically, just like everything else going from external to internal, it's the same thing with play. We now know all of that manual play with the trucks and the toys and the blocks and the Legos, all of that manual play becomes mental play. All of that manual play is the foundation of planning, prioritizing, and problem solving. Executive functioning is mental play, period. You're doing play up here. You're coming up with a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, scenario 1, scenario 2. How do I solve this? How do I solve that? That's mental play. Humans never stop playing. Play is so important to the human brain, and we live in a world of disappearing play. And that's the foundation of why so many kids can't stay in their chair and listen to a lecture and are hyperactive, because now a lot of kindergarten and preschool classes, kids are sitting at tables, learning how to write, learning letters, learning numbers. Play is disappearing. A couple of years ago, a lot of schools in the South got rid of recess time because there was heavy pressure for standardized testing teachings, that kind of stuff. And that led to a huge amount of kids with anxiety, sensory, all those issues. Play is so unbelievably important. How's everyone doing? Nice. So I'll very quickly. So when nonverbal and verbal working memory are weakened and disconnected, I said before, it creates a whole mess of issues in the ADHD brain. The first is conditional thinking. If, then, cause and effect thinking. So if your nonverbal and verbal systems are weakened and disconnected, it's hard for you to fully understand if, then, cause and effect thinking, which is basically, okay, if the future is going to look like that visual imagery, then right now I need to do this, self-talk. That's executive functioning, right? We have to know what the future looks like so we know what to do now. It's last period, you need to know what to put in your backpack, what to take out of your locker, because you need to be able to see what you need at home. You can't do that unless these things are working together in harmony. You can't plan for the weekend. You can't plan for homework. You can't do your morning routine if you don't visualize it first. All of us visualize things before we do it. Think about it. You wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off, you look at the clock, and without even thinking about it, you visualize, okay, I gotta make my coffee, I gotta sit down, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. You visualize in a matter of seconds everything you have to do to get to work on time or to get your kids to school on time. These kids aren't doing that. And part of that is because of time blindness. So ADHD is also known as the time myopia, a blindness of time. So you are stuck in the now. So part of nonverbal working memory in the visual imagery system is our hindsight and our foresight. And when we have a weakness in nonverbal working memory, it causes us to be stuck in the now. We're not learning from the past, and we're not forecasting into the future. We're stuck in the present moment, and we are stuck in instant gratification overdrive. So when you have a lack of cause and effect thinking, you're going to piss a lot of people off. You're going to have a really hard time making and keeping friends. And if you're time blind, you're going to have a hard time keeping a job. So that's why we have to start taking ADHD so seriously. And here's a great image for parents and everybody. This is your neurotypical of how far into the future people can see. So 2-year-olds are stuck in the now, and as they start to develop executive function skills, they're able to see further and further into the future. And it's fascinating, everybody here, 23 and up, look at your phones and look at how many things you have planned beyond 5 weeks. Right? It's really fascinating because that's how far into the future we can see. Visual imagery is key to executive functioning and planning. Okay? So we can
prepare children, so I'm sorry, I want to ask a question.
Okay, we're diving deeper here. Okay, so one of the most effective ways to teach time management with these students is to start using these analog clocks. So this is a very crucial thing for teachers to use, for parents to use, for kids to become independent and be able to sense time. So a big issue with time blindness is they don't feel time, they don't sense time moving. So this is a great stuff from ADHD dude and Sarah Ward, is you get these analog clocks, you get a dry erase marker, and you draw over it to show them how time passes. Okay, you have Minecraft from here to here, or teachers can use it. Okay, you have, the yellow is your do now, the green is the lesson, and then the 9 is your group work. It's a great way for them to be able to visualize time, see it, and sense it. So all of this transition to digital clocks has hurt kids' ability to internalize time. So this is a great method to use. And what we do at GrowNow, part of the GrowNow model, is this idea of predictions and review. So we want kids to start to become future thinkers. Being future thinking is part of your executive functioning system. So parents can do this, teachers can do this. So you start the activity, you're taking your kid to basketball lesson, you're taking your kid to school, you're taking your kid to a birthday party, you're a teacher about to start your lesson. Before it starts, take 1 minute, 2 minutes, and ask the student, ask your child, to make a mental movie. So mental movie is visual imagery, non-verbal working memory, but it's the language we use with kids. Make a mental movie of predictions of what you think the activity and event will actually look like. So have them visualize it. Okay, at the birthday party, it'll be like this. We're going grocery shopping, the store will look like this. It'll be busy, it'll be empty, it'll be, they'll be here this. We'll do this first, we'll do that first. We'll go to the vegetables first, we'll do this. Have them start to make predictions of what they think things are going to look and feel like. Okay? Record some of those predictions, and as the adult, ask further questions to elicit more information from those mental movies. Ask reflexive questions to pull the information out of them. And it's so fascinating. This is one of the practices where you're going to start to see really gradual progress. Because in the beginning, you're going to have to ask lots of questions. And I've done this with students where the first time they make a mental movie, it's literally all they can do is picture themselves in a big white room with nothing around them. And nothing's moving, it's like a Google image in their head. And we want it to go from like 60s, 70s black and white grainy TV to 2023 HD details. We want details and we want it there. So we ask questions to elicit more information to see what's happening in these mental movies. And then using these predictions that the kid makes, make a plan. We're creating self-talk scripts. So we make mental movies and then we figure out how do we use our brain coach in those situations. Okay, you go to the grocery store and it's super crowded, they don't have what we want, what can we do? What can we say to our brain in that moment to help us? How can we make sure we stay regulated and we follow a plan? So come up with what things they can say to their brain if and when these predictions come up. And then you do the activity and event with your student or your child, and then at the end, you review the predictions versus reality. Okay, here were the things you predicted. You can record a video of them talking about their predictions, so you have the video evidence or those sorts of things, and review the predictions versus reality. Okay, you predicted it was going to be really crowded, it was going to be really boring, it was going to be really hard, and here's what ended up happening. So in the beginning, you'll see kids make a lot of negative predictions, and reality ends up being a heck of a lot better. It wasn't that bad, it wasn't that hard. And it's really important, and this is where they start to do their hindsight. They're looking back at the past and reviewing predictions versus reality. So this really starts to build competence and confidence, and we start to get kids in the habit of doing these mental dress rehearsals, these mental pre-simulations of how the future is going to play out before they do an activity and an event. And this is so incredibly powerful for these kids to develop competence and confidence. There's so many different ways to use this, tailored towards the individual, tailored towards the event, but I think you get the idea.
What age do you start?
You can start as young as 4 or 5 years old. Absolutely, but but obviously a 4 or 5 year old is not going to have a very detailed mental movie. So you're going to have to kind of do it with them, co-regulation, right? So really what we're teaching these kids to do is stop, see the future, say the future, talk about it, talk to your brain about it, feel what it feels like. Is it a positive consequence, a negative consequence, something we want to avoid, something we want to work towards? Feel the future, play with that future, figure out how you can persevere through some hardships, some challenge, some new things you haven't done before, and go towards that future, becoming future thinkers. And this right here is some of the best stuff from Sarah Ward, the SLP I talked about before, is this get ready, do, done model. Who's seen this before? Nice. I like it. Cool. So we typically think to start at get ready, do it, and we're done, right? That's how most things are done at home. Most things are done at school. We get ready, we do it, and we're done. But we teach kids to now start at done. And how do we start at done? A mental movie of what it looks like to be done. So before they ever start the task, because we know the problem with task initiation and starting hard things, right? We teach them to visualize what it looks like to be done. Because motivation is an emotion of the future. You can't motivate yourself to do something unless you know what it looks like in the future. People who are successful with their diets visualize themselves down the road looking and feeling better. And it helps them make better choices in the present moment. So we finish, what does it look like to be done? A mental movie of what it looks like to be done. And then we plan backwards so that we can execute forwards. So what does it look like to be done? What do we have to do to make sure that mental movie comes true? And then get ready is the list of things. That's nice. Get ready is the list of things we need so that we can do. Does that make sense? So this is a great thing to use in one-on-one therapy sessions, in the classroom, and you can even bring it in the home and bring, you can Google this, Sarah Ward, get ready, do, done, print it out, and share it. And another great thing for parents to do is we have to replace the written checklist. So it is parents' innate idea, let me make a written checklist of everything my son or daughter needs to do, right? And how often does that written checklist get done? Because what is that written checklist not doing? It's not triggering non-verbal working memory. Non-verbal working memory is the foundation of all executive functions. All executive functioning starts with non-verbal working memory. So when you have a written checklist of words, first of all, they have to read it, and that's a pretty anxiety-producing task for kids with ADHD. But they're just reading the task. They don't know what the end result looks like. What am I supposed to look like when I'm doing the task? So let's replace those written checklists with real-world pictures. Not Google Images, not PixArt, whatever it might be. Get a real picture of your son sitting down at the desk doing homework. If he has trouble with hygienic tasks and tasks of daily living, get a picture of him brushing his teeth, print it out, laminate it, put it exactly where he's going to see it, put it all over the house. Get these real-world images. And the best thing I've seen the most progress with is the morning routines and getting ready for school. So get a picture of your son standing next to the front door, backpack on, lunch in hand, everything he needs, what he's supposed to look like at the end of the morning routine, and then fade back all those verbal prompts. Go get this, go get that, go do this, go get that. Replace it with this. So we are replacing our verbal prompts with a visual prompt, which is decreasing prompt dependency. They look at this and they know what they're supposed to look like. Make sense? Question? Say that louder.
I have a picture, this exact photo of my son for the mornings, and it's on my fridge, and he really responds to it. Wow.
The star of the presentation today.
I'm a little lost. I can speak from experience that my child worked with an OT that specialized in executive function. And a big thing we did was a checklist for the entire year last year, and it worked. We don't use it anymore, but he still does everything on that checklist every single night.
That's fantastic.
But,
that's great.
But this is saying don't use checklists, they don't work.
Well, it obviously worked for your son. So that's
With some things, listen, I mean,
yeah,
still,
nothing is a one size fits all.
Repetition,
Yeah.
doing something with no use.
Repetition becomes
Yeah.
habit.
That's a fantastic thing. And your son's an outlier. And that's a fantastic thing, that's
It's
great.
far from great, so.
Oh, but the fact that it worked, you know, there is nothing, at the end of the day, we're talking about human beings. And nothing in the history of child development and education has ever been one size fits all, okay? This is what the research is showing us helps, but are there kids that respond to checklists and it helps them and they're independent? Sure, that's great. This doesn't mean every kid with ADHD and executive function is going to respond to this. Some kids will take the pictures, rip it off the wall, and tear it
There's
up.
also a spectrum of ADHD, so.
Yeah, it's
So
exactly,
for one,
exactly.
checklist will work, but for one with the higher
Exactly.
level of ADHD,
But if
the
the-
checklist won't work. They actually
Exactly.
won't.
And if the checklists work, that's great. You don't got to take pictures and print them out and laminate them and post them all over the house. So if that particular thing is working for your child, that's fantastic. Yep.
So, I mean, this sounds like something, sorry, I don't know if you opened the floor to questions, so I'll just,
I think we're good for questions now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
The floor is open.
If it's an older child, like someone who's 15, and you're just discovering that this may be an issue of executive functioning and all that, I'm not putting a picture of my 15-year-old on the refrigerator. You know, it's not even gonna be here. It's just gonna look at me like, Ma, this is how I go to school. Deal with it. I'm just gonna be like, you're right.
So,
Have fun.
yeah, so it depends. So it depends on how much is it affecting his life, how much is it affecting his school life.
I think it's
You know,
more the school
that's a
life.
pretty common concern. I have an older son. He doesn't want to take pictures, and he doesn't want to print it out all over the house. Okay, how much toxic stress is he causing in the home by not getting ready in the morning? Is he getting? You know, would it be more effective for him to get in trouble at school if he's late? You know, would it be more effective for him to have to stay after or get there early or something like that?
But-
You know, is it more natural consequences?
But if
But
he's
it,
living in the now, like you're saying,
yeah.
they're not thinking about the consequence. They're just thinking, all right, I got my stuff done. You
Well,
know,
the natural
go to school.
consequence is that you know that you have to build the cause and effect. So you also have to understand the if then cause and effect thinking that has to be built in there. Natural consequences are super important to kids with ADHD, not like the typical, because you have to use scaffolding when you present it to them. So like you chose to be late to school, okay, then you also chose to stay after today. So it's important to use if then cause and effect language with kids. You chose to do this, okay, you also chose that. And for them to be and to process with them and work with them, because if you just say, oh, that's it, you have the tension, you were late, that's not going to do a lot, and it's going to keep happening. You have to work with them to process the information. Yes. Cool. Yep.
Do you have an opinion on medication?
Yes, so medication is highly evidence-based. So there's been more research done on ADHD medication than pretty much any medication in all psychiatry. And there's, what's up?
By the way, there is a shortage nationwide.
Yes, big shortage and all that kind of stuff. But there's obviously a lot of problems with ADHD medication because it can affect appetite, and it can affect sleep, and it can affect mood. So it can be incredibly hard for parents to trial these medications. So what you have to do is start on a very low dose and go through these trial periods. Another problem with ADHD medication is there's probably too many different options, right? So finding the right one that works for your child, is it a Vyvanse? Is it an Adderall? Is it those kinds of things? You have to find the right medication, start at a low dose, and watch them very closely to see how it affects them positively or negatively. And there's lots of stigma, of course, around ADHD medications because they're abused on college campuses, of course, right? So that causes a lot of issues, and then you hear the horror stories of, I gave my kid these meds and he freaked out and had all these problems. But you have to work very, very closely with the prescribing doctor to make sure you start it at a low dose and you observe them throughout that trial period.
Our mantra here is medication can be effective and is appropriate when there are no side effects that are unacceptable. Unacceptable side effects would be that zombie that everybody goes, yeah, that my nephew was on the
Correct.
zombie. That's a side effect. Loss of appetite with loss of weight is a side effect.
Correct.
And it's a juggle, it's a dance. It can take 6 months to find the right medicine. Some children cannot be medicated because they have side effects.
Yes.
And another matter of fact is that the stimulant drugs that we actually use for ADHD have been around longer than aspirin. There's really a long history with those drugs. So a lot of people are very nervous about them. It's okay to be nervous. but you really have to monitor. It's not something that just pop a pill and forget about it. That's really not. the
And you
way
don't
to
have to be on it for your entire life.
That's
So
right.
there's
You
always
don't have to
ways
be
to
on it.
there's always ways to wean off of it and find other
And,
programs.
then, and once, when kids actually learn how to do all of this stuff, they manage it. They manage it. They
Correct.
learn to.
And the
They
best
learn
thing to do is medication plus therapy. That's the best thing. Use those two things in conjunction so you can work to fade off of that
I
medication.
think we had a question over there. No, you know, okay. No problem. Okay.
As far as, go back to 3 zones of executive functioning. If your kid has, like, if it's not affecting social.
Yep.
And they can leave the room and they're very social and everything like that, but it is affecting, school and some home.
Mm-hmm.
Could that still be ADHD?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There's students I work with very severe ADHD that are star of their lacrosse team, star of their hockey team, have a ton of friends, have great talents. Look at Michael Phelps. He had very severe ADHD, but he obviously had lots of friends and lots of popularity and those kinds of things. So yes, it can still be ADHD, but you have to look at it on an individualized basis. It's a spectrum. So this child is effective at home, and this child is affected at school. How can we put systems in place to make him more independent in those areas so he has more time to be social? So it needs to be tailored towards the strength. The strength is social, his relationships, his peers, and what he does away from school. How can we tailor academics and home life to make him more independent there so he has more time for preferred tasks? So it needs to be a lot of parent coaching and a lot of making sure that his educational programming, whether it's an IEP or a 504 or whatever, is all tailored towards independence in those areas.
I also want to just say that, I know you talking about the IEP and 504 and all that. I totally understand what you're saying, but I just want to comment that there are services that kids need.
Of course. Oh,
I just wanna,
once again, not a one-size-fits-all thing. IEPs and 504s are like, I'm just talking about overall for this specific population. IEPs and 504s are 100% necessary. This is how kids get speech therapy, OT, PT, 100% necessary. But what the slide said is IEPs are great, but we have to start thinking about an exit plan. IEPs need to have an exit plan. You can have an IEP, you can have a 504, but instead of just saying, let's keep this from first grade to graduation, let's come up with an exit plan so this child no longer needs it. So we have to have more of a end it off mentality. You know what I mean? But yes, absolutely, IEPs and 504s, if I express that they're not a good thing, I apologize. Yes.
So let's talk about Michael Phelps a minute, because I wasn't sure of what you said. I never read about him. I know that he's an Olympian, whatever.
Yeah.
But you said that he got in trouble with the law later. So his mom had him on a schedule.
Yep.
And
Completely structured him so he couldn't get in
worked
trouble.
for him.
Yeah.
So his ADHD was never taken care of properly. Is that what we're saying?
No, it was taken care of
But
properly.
then the
The
minute his
mom.
mom stepped away, he got in trouble with the law.
Because she didn't
So
provide
what
with
does
the
it
skills.
There you go.
long term?
So for him, it was this one specific thing of swimming. Let's build this task of swimming. It wasn't about getting good grades, school. It wasn't about this. It was build this thing. Once swimming was taken away from him because he retired and he's not an Olympian anymore, and he's famous and has lots of money,
So it wasn't taken care of properly because
it was taken care of in terms of his ability. We're not talking about making
I'm
ADHD.
not specifically talking about him.
Yeah.
I'm just using him as an example. So
Yeah.
we're being able
It was
to
managed. It was managed. His
Right.
ADHD was managed. He wasn't getting into trouble, and he was focusing on building skills.
But
But when he got older, yeah.
What does that mean
Right, he still has,
for the rest of the ADHD
Yeah.
population?
So I
Are
think-
they all at risk?
He still has a brain difference. Yeah, ADHD comes with all those things I talked about earlier.
With therapy and medication, are we
Even
seeing
though
the light at
kids
the end
do
of the
take
tunnel, or?
That's certainly the plan. He was a child a while ago when it was more of that focus on external behavioral. Keep him out of trouble, keep him out of trouble. If we teach kids to strengthen their nonverbal and verbal working memory, we're strengthening independence. Every single kid is different. He had severe ADHD. When he still has it. Swimming was taken away from him. He now lived an unstructured life where he had lots of.
only in that area, not in other areas of
Yeah.
life, so our
Yeah,
goals
I don't know if he was getting therapy. I don't know if he was getting
Other
counseling. I don't know the specifics about his life, but his mom structured his life to make sure that his ADHD would not get the best of him, and she was successful with that his entire life until swimming got taken away. Yep.
Statistically, there are more boys diagnosed with ADHD and on medication than girls.
Because they're identified earlier. It's probably really 50-50, but boys are more of that hyperactive type where it's external and easily noticed, and girls tend to internalize.
So is a girl, let's say there are girls that are functioning in school and socially, but there are ADHD tendencies in them, executive functioning delays. So that's a medication management issue, or is that more of just building up the skills if they're functioning normally in their life?
Depends on the individual. So, medication is about helping kids to function in their life. So you always want to ask, how much is this ADHD affecting the quality of this child's life? That's the whole point we put them on any medication. You give someone with diabetes insulin to improve their quality of life, right? It's the exact same thing. So how much is this ADHD impairing this child? Do they need a stimulant? Do they need a mood stabilizer, whatever it may be, to improve their quality of life? So it all depends on the individual. Yep.
Do medications have, like, other than the in the moment effects like the loss of appetite and daily stuff, do they have any long-term effects, like on a child's like psyche or like
That's
on?
incredibly rare. Incredibly rare, and I'm not even sure if that's even a documented thing. That's a great question. I've worked with thousands of kids on medication, and I've never heard of that happening.
But like lifelong, meaning for kids that have been on medication for 10 years, did it do something else in their system?
Let's say for girls, like just to follow up, like girls with their menstrual cycle and stuff like that.
That's certainly a possibility. I personally don't know about that. That's a great question. I really don't know.
They've been studied a lot. I think if there were side effects that we don't know, I mean, read the stuff that comes along with it, and
Yeah.
it'll tell you. There is some anecdotal evidence, but I mean, a lot of research has been done.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you just go ahead and medicate. Like, you always have to be aware and
Yes.
pay attention. Talk to your doctor, talk to psychiatrists who do these all the time. They see really firsthand any type of side effects. The thing about stimulant medications, which is what we're mostly using, if you see a side effect, the child is a zombie. The medication is really, it's metabolized very quickly. Once it's out of the system, whatever that side effect was, it goes away and it doesn't stay. Those side effects don't stay. Psychotropic drugs, mood stabilizers, and some of the things that are given for anxiety and so on, those take about 6 weeks to get into your system. If you need to get off of them, you gotta take another 6 weeks to get off. ADHD med stimulants are not like that. You take it once, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, you don't take it anymore. There's no withdrawal, you can watch a kid coming off the meds, who'll go from, being focused to not focused, but you're not going to see the types of things that you might see with psychotropic medications. It's just, but that's always a conversation with your doctor.
She answered it way better than I did.
I do have a follow-up question,
Yep.
if I could really quickly.
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
just wondering, like, what's the average amount of time you see when you do medicate a child that they're on it? Like, is it typically, you see kids are on it for like 10 years then come off? Is it a 5-year like average? What is the average amount of time that kids need on
I don't think there is an average because there's so many different medications.
They have to be very individualized. Prescription and have to keep on getting, like, does the prescription continue to have to change? Because then you're constantly upping.
I see that a lot. I see a lot of kids start on stimulants, on it for a while, move to like a Vyvanse. Yes. Really these medication questions are really for people who prescribe. I don't prescribe medications. That's very important for me. I'm not a licensed physician. So, but yes, I've seen a lot of kids change medications over time. And it's hard to say how long they're on it because number one, every kid is different and they're changing medications. And there's so many different medications. So that's like, a lot of parents will call me and they'll say, I want to do your therapy, but how long is it going to take? How long is he going to be in your therapy until I see progress, right? They ask me that all the time. That's like the number one question. And I can't answer that because number one, that's guaranteeing results. You can't guarantee results, right? As a speech therapist, you can't guarantee results. And then every single kid is different. I've had some kids be with me for 3 weeks and they're done. And we have some kids that have been with me for 5 years. So it's just all a matter of the individual, and I can't give a number, right? Yep.
I just want to say, my son was on ADHD medication, and by in 10th grade, he was the one that came to me, and he's like, Mom, you know what? I think I want to try without it. So he was at the point where he was able to self-awareness of his ADHD and try, and he failed a lot, and he didn't do well, and things were hard for him, but I think he was at a point where he realized he wanted to take care of this on his own. And be in control.
And there's one more thing about kids, like you talk about your self-aware son. A friend of mine has a son who also about 9th or 10th grade said, look, I said, I'm done with medicine, I want to be off. And the mom was upset, how are you gonna do it? And he said, you know what, Mom, when you said focus before, I had no idea what you were talking about. It's like if I said to this crowd, because we're all kosher, tell me what lobster tastes like. You can't, you have no idea. He had never tasted focus, he had no idea what it tasted like. He said, now I know what it tastes like, now I know what focus is, now I know what you mean. So, if I need to focus, I have to sit in my room, I have to get a friend, I have to do this, I can't be at the library, it's too noisy. Once he knew what it felt like, he wanted to get there on his own. And that's a self-awareness, that's a kid who really knew his awareness, he knew where he was.
Yep.
I wanted to go back to when you were talking about play.
Yep.
Because you said play is how they're gonna come up with that nonverbal working memory.
Play is the most
And
important
so-
thing for kids to do in the world,
And so
yes.
when my son was little and in preschool, and I kept being concerned, I kept like stating my concerns about, he doesn't play, he observes. He'll go into the box area and he'll watch everyone else play. He'll come to the puzzles table and he'll watch everyone else do the puzzle.
Yep.
He doesn't play in my house. I put all of the children next to him so that they could build magnifiers with them, and he just watches them.
Was he
play,
eventually
and I was
diagnosed
so-
ADHD?
So I didn't get to the evaluation because
Mhm.
now in 1st and 2nd grade it's coming up.
Yep.
And I feel like, why wasn't those concerns heard? Do you know what I'm saying? Like all of these red flags, if you come, you're saying all the things, like, oh my God, that was my kid when he was little. Oh my God, that was my, it's like.
That's a great question.
I-
Was he
Should-
was he evaluated?
should be- yeah, and he got 3 times 30 OT and 2 times speech and 5 hours of SEED and now 5 hours of P3. Like it's just, how come more wasn't asked?
Was it an executive functioning based approach? Was he learning to, stand back and read the room and process and then enter?
I think
Was he
a
just
lot
sitting
of
back and
the
observing and
concerns-
thinking about his own
I
things?
think a lot of the things that for him, he was so wiggly and so distracted and so was turned into sensory processing.
Can I just say, maybe
OTs.
he wasn't behavioral, so.
He's not.
No,
That's why he was
no.
missed, okay, that's why he
Because
was
he
missed.
doesn't bother anybody.
No, if it's ADD and not ADHD.
And those are the kids that fall in the cracks.
Yeah, those kids.
Right.
like,
Kids who
they're
are
bomb
Kids who aren't
bombs.
behavioral.
No one is
That
getting
can be
hurt.
his problem, so
He's
it's
not
not
aggressive, he's not violent, no one is getting hurt.
What's wrong there?
Maybe Fridays, get ready.
When he's so young, right? He's still developing his visual and spatial, whatever.
I love the passion.
He might just be a kid.
Great work.
But
Yes.
the truth is, children who are behavioral get the nod all the time. Those are the kids who are sent early for psychoed evals and for neuropsychs for those $5,000 evaluations. And the children who sit quietly do not get attention. They kind of do fall between the cracks, and that is, unfortunately, it's true. It's true.
But I must say, the passion, the emotion, the questions,
Guilty.
the fact that shows you guys paid
It's hard to
attention.
hear that your kid is struggling, that's really the truth. It's really,
Trust
really
me, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the point made about hyperactivity is 100% true. If your kid's not a behavior problem, we're not going to spend special education tax dollars on him. Absolutely. Yep. And thank you all. I love the passion.
I have
Yes.
one question regarding the therapy. You spoke about medicine, and I know you're a therapist. What kind of therapy does an ADHD kid need, and at what age should that therapy start?
Executive functioning therapy, so it needs to be executive functioning therapy focused on internal skills, not external systems and accommodations. So executive functioning therapy, not executive function coaching. So executive functioning therapy focused on internal skills, and that can start as early as 4 or 5 years old. Yeah. But of course, to age expectancies. We're going to work with the kid we're going to work with the 4-year-old to act like a 4-year-old. And all 4-year-olds are prompt dependent, right? So we're not going to teach them to be mini adults. We're going to teach them to be a more successful 4-year-old. Yep.
You said that spatial awareness, the visual, and the working memory don't work together in children. I mean, you had a 0 to 3, I think, and 3 to 5. So how are you able to even recognize and diagnose ADHD if a kid's brain is not fully developed at that point? They don't even have that.
You're typically not typically not diagnosing that young.
You're not. So
Yeah.
what age is the typical diagnosis?
5, 6.
That's right.
And 5 to 7 is when they're still developing it then.
Right,
So,
and it could be
so you
just-
diagnose it right away, just at that point, the second you see it.
There's other things that you can see. You can have a lack of joint attention, a lack of object permanence. You guys know about object permanence, of course. So there's different developmental milestones. You know, between the ages of 0 and 3, you guys know as parents, it's all about milestones, milestones, milestones. So when milestones start getting missed and there's delays, that's when we do an evaluation. So it's not always, you know, visual imagery and self-talk. There's other milestones we have to look at.
And if you just look at like emotional regulation versus, like if she has just
Yeah.
one issue, it might just be another issue.
Yeah.
Whereas ADD has all 5 of them, or at least most of the 5.
Correct.
Let's take one more question.
One more question. 2 more questions.
2 more questions, okay, 2 more questions, we're good, okay.
I know, I hear a lot of people talking about the younger child, and you were saying that some kids do fall through the cracks. Let's say you have a child that's 15, and now all of a sudden, his educators are opening their mouths when I've never had this issue. Never had a behavioral issue, not hyperactive, none of that. Nothing. It's,
No, I'm saying.
well, now what they're seeing is, no, because I'm a new person, like this, I don't know.
So what's the question?
So the question is it too late? Like, at what point can you get therapy where?
Never too late. Never too late. We work with college graduates. We work with adults. Never too late. Never too late to work on skills and develop independence, especially not when they're below 18 years old. Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to make a comment about play and also in its relation to what he said, and then I have a question. A lot of times, like, I'm a speech therapist, so a lot of times also as a parent, I got a lot of the questions like, for a 2-year-old, for example, what educational toys can I buy my child? Or how can I teach my child the ABCs or numbers? And it was just an example. I was on this chat and a lot of moms responded, oh, get him this toy, and they were sending out links to Amazon. And then I responded with, well, play is the most important form of learning, and do this and this. And then everyone just like was just silent.
So very quickly to add to that, as we saw a rising increase, exponential rising increase in ADHD diagnoses, executive functioning challenges, more self-regulation, behavioral problems at school, what else did we see the rise of at the exact same time? A little thing called Baby Einstein, Kumon, all these educational tools that involve technology keeping kids away from true play, and the rise of screens, of course.
So I did want to emphasize the importance to mothers of play and the importance of seeing the milestones before getting to the ABCs and 1, 2, 3, because there are so many. So it's very important to focus on that before you jump to the ABCs and 1,
There's
2,
nothing
3s,
wrong with
because
getting down on the floor and playing with your
Right.
child, whether it's
Yes.
rolling
But
a
I've
ball
never,
or.
like, so many
doing
conversations.
But all kids need
I've
play.
had.
18, 19, 20, college-age students need to play. Play sounds like a little kid word.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to play. When we're coming up with multiple different scenarios in our mind, being playful, being creative, using our imagination, that's play. It's not all on the floor. Everybody has to play. Adults have to play too.
Okay, so I'll just get to my question. In terms of visual imagery, what do you do with children who have autism and have difficulty seeing the future? And similarly, children with a cognitive disability, for example, to do the clock, like they really do not have concept of time. So how do you incorporate that?
You're going to have to provide more and more prompts and scaffolding. You're going to have to provide more and more visuals to help them. You like to use those sequencing cards, right? Like here's a sequence of someone baking a cake or doing this. You're going to like a more of a neurotypical, just your ADHD kid without the autism and other stuff. You can ask them to make a mental movie, practice it. It's going to be pretty bad at first, then in a white room, then you make it more HD. But if there's autism, if there's more disabilities there, you're going to have to provide the prompts and more visual scaffolding before they're able to do it independently. So it's going to be more work on your end.
Also, if the IQ is very low. Like
Same thing.
Okay, can we just thank Mike for coming tonight?